welcome to Revive Ministries Podcast. As we near the end of 2023, I'm reminded of how contrasting this time is. Sometimes it's a time of joy. We come together, whether it's the holidays, you may be with your family, or it could be a time of, pain, despair. There might be empty chairs around the table because, loved ones are no longer around with us today. They didn't make it to 2024. It's just, and then what's reminded also when we think about this is the stories surrounding them, and sometimes our own story and how we understand it. Last month, we spent a lot of time on the difference between a home and a house, and how there's intangible kind of value in a home that a house sometimes doesn't bring. Today we'll discuss about the importance of stories and how we can find hope, and sometimes how we can navigate in connecting and having a better outlook on what's next. Today also we will be reminded that it's important to remember that if you are in crisis, to find help. As adults, as we grow older, sometimes the hardest thing to say is, I need help. Whatever community. I don't like reinventing the wheel. Working in the mental health field, I know there's so much cultural context. There's so much out there that we need to consider, especially if you are struggling. But in the United States, if you are struggling, 9AA is one resource among many, whether you are in the faith-based community or if you're whatever it is, go to your rabbi, go to your mosque, go to wherever you find comfort that you can ask these three words, because the thing is about community, about finding that help, as sometimes it's hard for us as adults. Today we have a new guest. His name is Manohar, right? Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your insight with us today. Just thank you. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Robert, for inviting me. And I really like what you said about the adults being vulnerable, because that really makes a lot of difference.
It does, and a lot of times it may be a little bit easier. Certain cultures might be more accepting, other cultures not so much. And my mom is from South Korea, my dad's from Puerto Rican, so you got a mixed bag, and you kind of know that it's not that these cultural things can be barriers, but they don't have to stay barriers if you have the right conversation. I want to ask you. I'm going to start with a quote, and then we'll get started, Manohar. As a man, I love this quote because it's open-ended. I like how people interpret this. It says, "A man travels the world over in search of what he needs, and returns home to find it." What comes to mind when you hear this quote from George Moore?
uh, so when I heard this quote, this actually reminded me of a story that I think I read. I listened to recently. The book is called Acres of Diamond. Okay,
Mhm.
and basically, the story, exactly, the quote sums up the story. So basically what happens is, the man wants to find some diamonds. So he comes to know that somewhere that there are diamonds, and then he sells everything, and goes in search for diamonds.
Mhm.
Okay, so he goes and searches, but finally he gives up. So I think his son, uh, he's like, actually he doesn't want to uh, do the same thing that his father did, and he
Mhm.
just wants to go back to that same place. He goes and he starts plowing his fields that were there, and there he finds a box of things. So yeah, so the author's interpretation actually in that sense is, what he's actually saying is, this is a book on mental health. Okay, and what exactly he says is, we try to search for peace or stability or happiness somewhere outside, but actually everything is inside. So that is
Yeah.
what uh,
Yeah.
the author
I
was pointing out.
I totally agree. I think the hardest conversations we have are the internal ones, like
Yeah.
the most important ones too, because I could feel miserable, Monahar, and I could say I'm gonna go to a beautiful island for a couple weeks, and that'll be nice. But I still bring myself with me. I'll still be upset, or to still have maybe family issues or disputes or unforgive. I'm not on just whatever resentment, despair. It still travels. So that internal conversation, is it starts from inside. It starts from you having that conversation. Um, I don't want to ask. I know this month is called. Everyone. I believe everyone has a story, whether it is in direct relation to maybe inspiring story of finding a way to understand how to navigate through life. But whatever it is, it doesn't have to be these big, huge, towering, inspiring stories. It could just be something about finding a way to manage life in a way that's comprehensive. That understanding can be very helpful. So I want to ask you, what elements of understanding your story or what you're passionate about, what has helped you to move forward, and what did not help you?
Okay, so this is a really interesting question, Robert. Yeah, so I like to actually quote, uh, like since you started with a quote, so I like to quote Martin Luther King,
Mhm.
and a very famous quote that actually really struck me hard is his quote, which says, "Darkness cannot remove darkness; only light can. Hatred cannot remove hatred; only love can." Okay, so yeah, so I like to just rewind maybe like 4 years back in 2019-ish time frame, or exactly 5 years back when it was 2018 and 2019 was just about to come.
Mhm.
So I was actually in the phase struggling with insomnia. So the problem was like there were too many things that were going in my mind. And the problem was uh, I came to know that not sleeping well is a no-no, because it can hurt you in the long run with a lot of issues. So I desperately wanted to sleep. Okay, so the desperation to sleep was actually creating anxiety, and anxiety was creating insomnia. So it was a going in a vicious circle where
Mhm.
one was feeding on each other. So, and just like anyone that gets has an access to internet, the first thing is searched Google, saw so many things,
Yeah.
and tried so many like even on YouTube you'll find so many things like you will be able to sleep in 30 seconds with this kind of breathing, or taking this, or taking doing that. So i I was, since I was on desperation, right, so I was trying that with a lot of expectations. So much pressure was there.
Mhm.
And in fact, like, to be honest, I even started with one form of meditation, did it for 1 week, hopped to the next one, and it was like it was so much on desperation. Like I went to the psychiatrist and he diagnosed that this is anxiety, and he gave me anti-anxiety pills also. But that was also not helping. But then later, when I went to a psychologist, and he told me, like, you can't keep doing the same thing of desperation and expect that you'll be able to sleep. And
Mhm.
that is when actually things changed for me. So I started with practice of meditation, which I initially started, which is the breath meditation, which everyone starting meditation will is given the advice mostly. Okay, so I started with that. So I just used to do a 5 minute of meditation before going to sleep. I slowly increased it from 5 minutes. After doing it for a 1 week, I slowly increased it to 8 minutes, from 8 minutes to 12 minutes, and 12 minutes to 20 minutes. And that became my sleeping ritual kind of a thing. So from 20 minutes before going to bed, it was something which I used to always listen to those guided meditations and then go to sleep. So it's not like everything went from point A to point B in a smooth line. So it
Mhm.
is like initially nothing much happened. So I was tested, my patience was tested, but then after slowly, after a few days, so the biggest change that really happened to me, Robert, was I stopped living in the past or in the future, and I started living in the present moment, right
Yeah.
here, right now. So
Hmm.
that made a lot of difference, where anxiety started losing its grip and the vicious circle was broken. And slowly and but steadily, my sleep, which was uh, um, filled with desperation, never stopped desperation. I never. So even if I didn't sleep, I wasn't desperate. So I just gave my body and my mind the relaxation time, and I used to go to sleep.
That's I just hear that story. It just reminds me how we need to be kinder to ourselves. We take the sense of urgency. I need to sleep. Um, it can, like you said, it cycles, and then you get more pressure, and you kind of. And for me, it's also this idea of self reflection. Taking the time that it'll take the time it takes. I know for me, I do meditation, I do breathing techniques. I also know if I notice that I'm gonna get stressed. One thing I know is that everyone's different. Like, social anxiety. I used to, I was in the military, so they used to say embrace the suck, but also just in recognizing that this may be discomforting. A lot of things are discomforting. Let's be honest. Socializing can be discomforting if you're. So when I was able to recognize that and address it appropriately, one thing in the mental health, I work in the field, but when I struggled before, I remember just there was this kind of barrier, just like you, like in regards to sleeping. For me, it's like I wanted people to understand what I was going through, and for me, what I realized was no one will, and that's okay. It's like getting there. It's getting to that. But then I'm like, okay, no one will, and it's funny because it became freer. Because then I can just
Yes.
focus on what I can do to make myself. So if I notice I'm gonna get stressed or if things are hard, I'm gonna do X, Y, Z, and it becomes more personalized to me as opposed to, oh man, I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't have this happening.
Yes.
I should be somewhere else. No, you're at where you're at. And then I kind of feel that has been helpful. I know it's not the same, but I feel there are similar elements. You're just kind of acknowledging that, oh, I can't sleep in your regard, and then addressing it, the way you can. And eventually it worked out. It started working. And and same thing with me. My one of the biggest complaints in mental health is not being heard. So I started journaling at times because it really was something I just needed something cathartically. And now, whenever I recognize any time there's anxiety or something that is bubbling up, or let's say right now is the holiday season in the States, family can be stressful. Let's be honest. Family can be
Yeah.
stressful. So, like, sometimes I just like, I prepare myself, expectation level and stuff like that. And that for me, similar to what you're saying, is being present. I think that's very important nowadays. Anything you want to add or anything you want to share?
Yeah, so the only thing which I'd like to add from whatever you said is the biggest thing is acceptance of the situation. Like I was reading the book by Deepak Chopra, and what he says is human beings spend lot of energy and waste lot of effort in not accepting the situation right the way it is, and
Mm-hmm.
we want the situation to be something else. So
Mm-hmm.
we spend a lot of energy in not being in the present and wanting that our situation has to be something different.
Mm-hmm.
So that is so, like, I feel like from whatever your story also, when you start accepting things the way it is, that is when we don't start losing our energy into anxiety or anything as such.
Yeah, and it becomes more, and I feel that just stigma wise, the whole mental health, substance use, people who are struggling has a little bit harder of a time because if I have a medical issue, it is still hard. It's still hard. You
Yes.
still, you can still be stuck, just like we're talking about. But the problem I find, especially mental health or whatnot, they're somehow attached to our value. Somehow, because I have X, Y, Z, because I'm depressed, because I have anxiety, my value has depreciated, which is not the case. You know what I mean? It's really just it's just like if I had high blood pressure or high cholesterol. I know it's not the same, maybe have not the same symptoms, but it still needs to be addressed. And I feel if we're able to take that lightness and say, okay, I need to take this medication to prevent other things to develop. I think that's what I like to see, especially in mental health, is treated the same way. So if a medication is not working, let's say, or a treatment is not working mental health wise, I'm not going to be like, my value is depreciated, this is what I'm just going to do. No, I'm going to try to find a different opinion. I'm going to talk to my mental health provider. This is not working. It's making me feel this XYZ, and maybe there's other options, because I do feel there's, everyone's very uniquely different when it comes to these kind of situations. And then when we have some onus, some like kind of like, okay, this is not working, some present mind, it does kind of find I find it more successful. So I want to ask you, kind of shifting gears. I know you shared a little bit about your story, but I always like to give an opportunity to share a little bit why, like what prompted you to share about this. Like, I know, people have found ways to overcome adversity, but now here you are on the podcast sharing your story. So it gives an opportunity for you to share what you're doing, why you're doing, and just so listeners know a little bit about yourself, wherever you feel comfortable.
Okay. So yeah, the reason why I am sharing this story, the biggest thing, Robert, is what I feel is, uh, we can always learn from, see, it's like we can learn from making those mistakes, and like whatever you shared, making the mistake and contemplating and then understanding. But like as Warren Buffett said, you can be smarter by learning from some other's mistake and not make that mistake yourself. So
Yeah.
this is something which I felt, yeah, that connected with me, because why should someone else make the same mistake of going in the area of desperation? In fact, I see a lot of people doing this, which is like going the path of desperation, into, and then being very desperate, trying to sleep. And the more they are trying to sleep, the harder it becomes to sleep. So as they say, if you resist, it persists. So I don't want someone else, like if someone watching your podcast, to understand that you shouldn't resist the things, because it will persist. So instead of trying in desperation, find ways where you can relax, and don't be hesitant to be vulnerable, because actually vulnerability is strength. Actually, like what you are saying, everyone has that misconception saying that we become depreciating in asset, but actually when we are vulnerable, it shows that we are human.
Mm-hmm.
We are not robots, like who are programmed. So we are human. So that is the beauty of being a human. So that is the reason why I share my story.
Yeah, and I feel there, I think it's wonderful. Just when I think about when I started the podcast, is really a lot of times there's conversations that are hard to have, and
Yeah.
this is just a platform to have it. And you mentioned we're not robots. I feel like we're human beings, that we're both exceptional and unimpressive at the same time. Don't take
Correct.
yourself too like. There's definitely that balance. And one thing also that, taking from what you said, is that when I ask you, and at least this is what I get if I say, how are you? And a lot of times it's busy. It's busy. All of us are just busy. And I feel it used to be okay. Like, I remember the time when I would say, how are you? Okay. But that was more deflective. I don't want to talk about things. But now everyone's very much they don't answer. It's like, how are you? I'm not asking how busy you are. It's how are you? And they're like, well, I'm busy. I've been so busy, overwhelmed. And I would say a little bit of self-care is better than none. I thought it also, communication and connection is also a thing that I feel has diminished. Like, we're doing this right now is wonderful. The idea of technology, how it's grown. Like, back in the day with phone cards and like all this stuff, we had to do this stuff in person. It is nice, but I think Sandra Bullock, I liked what she said. She's as connected as we are, with technologies also removes us from having to have human connections, made it more convenient to not be intimate. It's interesting because conveniency always kind of it's kind of, especially when it comes to communication, like this is convenient, but ideally, it's better to do face to face, especially someone close, so convenient doesn't always mean effective, but we kind of forget that. So like, there's a lot of convenient ways for us to share information, connect, but it doesn't mean that it's always that effective in the relationship, friendship, or whatnot. So, what are your thoughts when you see this quote?
Yeah, I kind of echo with this thought that yeah we have yeah I definitely agree with you on the point which you said that if there was no technology, I and you wouldn't have been conversing at all. So it
Yeah,
would have been an impossible thing because we are actually separated by miles actually. So it's almost like if I need to come to you or you need to come to me, it would take more than one day even in a flight.
yeah, no,
So that's
yeah,
definitely there. But yeah, I also agree that the more we are trying to find so many options, right? So we
mm,
are actually forgetting the basics, which is human beings need human connection. So human beings actually wouldn't have survived at all if there was no human connection in the first place. So that is definitely true.
yeah. And I feel like a lot of times just going with I remember my trigonometry, the derivatives when we go could do derivatives. A lot of times when it comes to like these complex emotions or complex situations, why does this bother me? I feel left out. That's I don't
Yeah,
feel good. I feel sad. These are very big, but these are very, sometimes these are core feelings. These are feelings that
correct.
are at the start of it. Like sometimes the complexity, it's just like in math, you have to get rid of those all that all that stuff to kind of make sense of what you're actually seeing. So in our feelings, taking the time to get to the derivative, what is going on. Well, this person does this and it makes me mad. I'm like, okay, why does that make you mad? Well, because I told them, like, when did you tell? Like, if you keep going, it's just because I don't feel appreciated, because I do all this stuff, I don't feel heard, all this stuff. So it's kind of interesting what all these words we use, but at the same time, we want to connect. We do. We're scared sometimes, I feel, and I feel that Sandra Bullock, what she says, I think, especially after COVID, I think it her. It's been really convenient to get things out in the mail or whatever, sent to you, and sometimes even the infrastructure has changed, especially those who are the food industry, how they had to kind of incorporate more. Um, but you also saw it interesting also in faith-based communities. They had to, in the States, they had to kind of think outside the box. They always thought people would come in, whether it's but now some of them were like, okay, we have to build the live stream. So a lot of things that weren't so big became big. So I'm not saying this technology is bad. I'm just saying it's also like, like you said, go into the simple, like the core reason we connect. It's not, it's, and I feel the conveniency kind of gets in the way of it.
Yeah.
Connecting isn't convenient sometimes. Helping people is not convenient. We kind of say these things because it makes us feel good to help someone, but helping someone is sometimes inconvenient. We're human. We have a lot of things on our plates, but the only way you could kind of understand, I think this one quote explains the kind of inner self talk that we're talking about before. Um, is from Chinua Achebe. I hope I didn't mess up your name. It says, no one can teach me who I am. You can describe parts of me, but who I am and what I need is something I have to find out myself." This kind of goes back to the first quote, but it's like a little by little. Like, we know I might, sometimes emotions or how we feel is exaggerated. Like, oh, this person, especially when you're younger, teenagers to 20s, it's exaggerated. I can never find someone again or whatnot. but at the same time, it tells a little bit about yourself. When you see this quote, and also the idea of self-reflection of how you got to the point from probably going through Google on every meditation possible just to find ways to sleep, and then seeing the psychologist and saying, pick one, like start working, and what shit, and like, yeah, sure. What from this quote, and what kind of helped you with that, getting to that point?
Uh, yeah, from what I understand in this quote is, yeah, it is all about the self reflection. Yeah, but the big change that really happened in my case, Robert, is like initially touched base, right? So instead of spending time on desperation, when I gave my time, so yeah, I am a very big believer that our bodies have all the intelligence that it needs to heal ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's only then when we stop getting in that way, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, there's a very beautiful story from the Buddhism. So what happens is, actually, a disciple of Buddha goes to him and asks, like, what is meditation? Why do you spend so much time meditating? So Buddha says, go get me a glass of water. So the disciple goes and then goes to a river and sees that the water is really muddy. He says that I can't get you a glass of get you a water. So Buddha says, go get that water and let that water settle there for a minute, or basically for some time. So he notices that the mud in the water settles to the bottom, and the clean water that comes to the top. So this is exactly what happens when you invest time in self reflection. So like when you are anxious with whatever the things you are talking about whatever the situation where you are, when you give the time for self reflection, the mud in the brain, so like it has all that intelligence. We human beings, though we are so different, we are programmed with one thing, that is like everybody has that innate capability which you can get back to your normal thing. Yeah, it takes time, like you touched base, like every human being is different. So for you it may take 2 months, for me it may take 2 days itself. So that's the beauty of being a human. So we are not going to have the same kind of thing. But when once you invest in your self care, and like they always say, prevention is better than cure. So if you spend that effort and stop, yeah. So like you also touched base about like people right now say that they are busy, but there's a very famous quote about by Steve Jobs, who he said that uh, innovation is not saying yes to the hundreds thousands of things. So Apple is a very big company because we have said no to so many things, and that is when we were able to build such a big company. So you have to, yeah, so like you also touched base, like we have so many things on our plate. So the art of saying no is also a very important skill. And only once you spend that time using self reflection, that is when you understand like what you have to say no. Because the fact is, we have, everybody has those 24 hours only. So we have to prioritize and start saying no. That is what makes a lot of difference, according to me.
I actually really love that you said that, because the idea of being able to say no is very human. A lot of times we lose sight of it. I cannot do X, Y, Z all on the same hour. Only one person. I cannot. I do. I'm not saying you can't. I'm kind of and this is my own opinion at this point. I don't really believe in the idea of multitasking in the sense that people like to say they do. I do my best work when I slow down. I find that, like, a lot of times. One time, I especially working in, I used to think this one task. In the medical field, there's a lot of documenting. I used to think this is so long. I'm like rushing, desperate, right? I time myself, and it was not that much time. It's just the time in my mind was different, and that's something that a lot of times we, that took the ability to think outside the box. Like, is it actually, being curious? Is it actually taking that much time? And that actually broke the ceiling for me, because I realized time is kind of very, there's a perception of how we feel time, in any time space. Everyone who have been to a class that they hate in elementary or school can testify to this. 1 hour seems like 8 hours in one of those classes. And then you have like a vacation, or you go see family, or you have a good time, and there's a whole weekend, a long weekend. It seems like a shorter amount of time than that one class. So it's interesting how we kind of perceive it. But I do like, extremely, a lot of people are afraid to say no. There are a lot of times like, yes, I don't want them to feel bad, but you can't help anyone if you're not taking care of yourself. Eventually we'll catch up to you. So like I said, I'm not trying to say not to encourage. I'm not trying to discourage people from helping each other, of course, but understand your limits. What you can, because it is work. It is work in itself. And I do want to say I do appreciate what you're doing, Manohar.
Yeah.
It's wonderful to just put yourself out there, and to people don't have to learn only from their experiences. Sometimes they can learn in this platform too. I want to ask you, as we wrap up, what would you want people to be reminded? It's just December, but it is the end of the month, end of the year, and what would you want to be reminded regarding finding hope in whatever story they're in? And any final thoughts you want to share?
Yeah. So yeah. So I'll again quote something from my book. Actually, I saw this in a movie called Frozen 2. So what happens exactly is the protagonist Anna is also faced with a very tough task of saving the kingdom, saving her sister, and all those things. Okay, so then she's reminded of one thing, which is do the next right thing. It's all about doing the next right thing. So the problem, Robert, I see is many times when we face a lot of overwhelm, right? So we want to wish, just like from New York to San Diego or San Francisco, you want to go. So it's about going 1 mile at a time. So there's always a saying like, how do you climb a mountain? One step at a time. So it is all about that. So focus on doing the next right thing, and then once you're done with that right thing, then focus on the next right thing. So it is not that you will not make mistakes, but at least you will break down the big thing into some smaller manageable things. And once you, even if you make that mistake, it's much better than procrastinating, because many times when you think and keep thinking, it goes into that analysis paralysis mode and nothing gets happened. So it's about doing the next right thing. And yeah, so I definitely would suggest and say like, I'm a much better person right now. It's only because I asked for help and I was vulnerable. So in fact, there's a TED talk by, if I remember the person name, it's called Bernie Brown, and the TED talk's title is The Power of Vulnerability. So she talks about how people have that mask of being superhuman, but only when you are vulnerable and you are ready to ask for help, that is when things change, and that's the beauty of being human. So this is what I would say, Robert.
Thank you so much. I want to also say, you mentioned a book. You wrote a book. I want to share those who are listening. All the notes on Monahar will be in the notes, so when you're looking at this episode, be sure to look and find out what he is doing, and you can check out the book. See if you want to. I found like that everyone. I always say personalize your care, but also listen to those who experience things. Be curious. Don't lose that curiosity. That's what makes life more colorful. You know what I mean? If we're just kind of like, this is how it is, I would say, even if you're not very used to certain ways of coping or ways of addressing things, be open-minded enough to consider and be curious about whatever it is. And I find, at least for me, my final thoughts is just like we've been saying, you know, um, be kind to yourself. Take the time to take the time to reflect, and also at the same time, there's not a race. Slow it down. Be able to say no is know your limits, and also um, forgive yourself and forgive those who those things. Those are key elements, but also be grateful for what you have. These are all very powerful things, but also, like I said in the beginning, and Monahar said, be vulnerable. Be vulnerable. Be willing to kind of see yourself in the mirror. The hardest thing to see sometimes is our own reflection, but have those inner conversations. I just want to say thank you. Thank you for coming on and sharing with us today so much. I want to share with those who are on listening. Remember to stay updated with Revive Ministries Podcast through ReviveMinistriesFL.com. Like I said, everything from that, all the links will be in the notes. And I want to say this is goodbye from Revive Ministries, with leaving with his last quote from Martin Luther King. You mentioned Martin Luther King before. I love this because it's like a progression. It's like, if you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, you have to keep moving forward.
Yes.